one.
Welcome to the reality show, day 91 of the war in Israel. I am joined by Morgan, Kirk, Jonathan. Hey guys, how's everybody doing?
Not too bad.
Has Israel lost the war, Jonathan?
Um, I don't know, Razi. I don't know. The thing that comes to my mind is Ms. Rand's comment on compromise, and someone will remind me of something effective. In any compromise between good and evil, it's evil that wins. And look, I'm in a privileged space of not being in the middle of the war. I'm obviously in the States. My heart and our minds are with people in Israel dealing with this. But I'm fearful that in what I'm reading about compromise, that the Israelis are even entertaining, that it's going to be evil that wins. So even if the fighting stops short term, in the long term, it's guaranteed because evil isn't eliminated, it's compromised with.
Kirk.
Yeah, I'm with Jonathan. I don't know. It definitely doesn't look like they've won the war yet, but yeah, I've read a couple articles from the Times of Israel today that signal that they seem interested in compromising, especially with pressure from the United States and others within the so-called international community. And with all these fears that this conflict is going to blow up into a wider conflict within the region of the Middle East, because as we know, before October 7th, the Middle East was just peaceful. There was never any wars or conflict for thousands of years. Everything was just fine. But suddenly everyone is all worried that this particular conflict between Israel and Hamas will blow up into a more regional conflict. So I don't know. I don't know but yeah, it looks like also with their the war cabinets in Israel and their interest in compromising, it doesn't look like they're on their way to victory either.
Morgan?
So, have they lost the war? No, but I've never been on the inside of a war room, right? And I'll never be in the army. I never want to be, and so on and so forth. So I'll never be in this position. But I imagine something that you have to do at some point is set out what the victory conditions would be, and also then what be the victory, what be the conditions for defeat, and whenever Israel's allies put pressure on them in this way, so when it's Antony Blinken going around putting pressure on Israel to basically help the civilians of the other side, or to be less forthright in defending itself or protecting the lives of its own soldiers, its own civilians, that might not be instant defeat, but that's slow defeat. And the conditions for Israel to achieve victory slip away the more and more, the longer and longer this conflict drags out, and the more and more entrenched the battle becomes. Or certainly the victory will come at a much higher cost for them. So I don't think this is a good thing for helping Israel achieve victory, but I don't think it's been defeated yet.
Yeah, and Morgan, you and I discussed on the Daily Objective that, in my opinion, the declared goal of the war was was insufficient. It was to eliminate Hamas, but it was a declared goal, and it was set out very clearly. And Netanyahu should know better that cowards shouldn't be decisive in their rhetoric because they're not going to end up following up. And I want to, there are many people on this channel, many people who I think are great commentators on Israel. I want to read from my favorite person on Twitter, on X. His handle is at Razi Ginsburg. So this is what he tweeted on October 8th. The longer Israel waits before taking military action, the less, quote, legitimacy it has from the, quote, international community to do what has to be done: the complete destruction of Hamas and a full permanent reoccupation of what little is left of Gaza. Netanyahu knows this. Maybe that's why he's waiting. So whenever we hear excuses from Israel, from the Israeli side, it is always well, America won't let us do this. And, you know, there's very little that America would have said against anything Israel did on October 7th or 8th, if that's what Netanyahu, when Netanyahu decided to act. And we also know, because, or at least there have been reports that in those 1 or 2 days, his defense secretary Gallant wanted to take action in southern Lebanon, knowing that Hezbollah is going to get involved, and they didn't. And since then, Hezbollah has been firing on Israel every single day. Israel does these pinpoint attacks. So yeah, that tweet is very, very prophetic. Jonathan.
Well, just say, it's a great time to recommend objectivist John David Lewis's book called Nothing Less Than Victory, which, my sense is that people don't even have any concept of what Israel winning the war against militant Islam would look like. And John David Lewis, who passed away, I don't know, maybe about a decade ago now, wrote this brilliant book, which I think we'd all probably recommend, called Nothing Less Than Victory. But, ostensibly, you'd say that the proposal is to make the threat non-threatening. And I mean, forget even the hostages being returned. At this point, there's still a tremendous threat. I mean, rockets are still being lobbed at Israel on a regular basis. And, my hope would be that no one would want to associate with Hamas or Hezbollah at all. That if you had any association with these groups, let alone harboring them or being part of them, you knew that you were a dead man walking. And that spirit hasn't been broken at all. And that's what worries me, I think, to Kirk and Morgan's point that, this is only really begun.
Frank, I'll try to remember to comment on that because I have something to say about that. But yeah, this is the book. Now, I don't actually think I read the whole thing. I read some of it. But it does talk about past military campaigns and the ones that were decisive. And in the parts that I read, at least, there wasn't much about the victor, giving aid, humanitarian aid and fuel and so on to the enemy. Now, what particularly pisses me off about Netanyahu is, when we talk about people who are, don't know better. Netanyahu knows better, and one of the reasons we know he knows better is because he was actually photographed reading this book in the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. He wrote a book, an excellent book about how to defeat terrorism, which of course he is not acting on. So
for what it's worth, Razi, there's a photo of him holding the Hebrew edition of a new textbook of Americanism as well that our friend Boaz gave him, but maybe he was just holding it. I don't think he necessarily read or retained these.
That's true. That's true. He is a photo op person. By the way, I have the Hebrew copy of that as well, so I might have a photo op moment. I actually have read it, but in English, so I also didn't read the Hebrew version of it. But Kirk.
Well, talking about Netanyahu, I think I was listening to Yaron a few episodes of his show ago, and he was talking about Netanyahu, and like the best case for Netanyahu is what else is there in Israel as far as politics goes? Like, what better alternative is there? And I'd like to ask you that because I don't really know much about Israeli politics. And we're talking about Netanyahu and how, like, he knows better and stuff. He's read all these books. He knows not to compromise with terrorists and compromise with evil. But are there any better politicians in Israel that could be more bold, be more confident than someone like Netanyahu, who seems to have a nasty habit of making compromises and not following through?
Well, so I asked Yaron Brook that question on last Friday's episode of the Daily Objective or something like that. And his answer was something like, if you go blindfolded into the Knesset and throw a dart, you're going to hit somebody better than Netanyahu. I mean, you have a 1 in 120 chance of actually hitting Netanyahu, but try again, and eventually you will get some. I mean, it's a bit of an exaggeration, but yeah, the fact with Netanyahu is he not only doesn't have the excuse of not knowing better, he doesn't have the excuse of, well, I don't know, my predecessor left me such a bad situation. You can use that for the first few months, a year or two. He's been there forever, so longer than anybody else.
I mean, it's so easy here, as I said, in America to kind of spout off, why don't do this or why don't do that? But like, there was a photo that went viral this week of an Israeli newscaster, a female newscaster, sitting giving the news, and in the back of her waistband there was a gun, and she was packing a gun, just reading the news. But the sense you got was, mess with this woman, mess with her, and this is what you're going to get. And like, I don't know. Again, this is not my area of expertise, but couldn't Netanyahu say something like, every day that the hostages aren't returned, we're going to bomb a city. We're not going to tell you which one it is. We're going to bomb a city. And, show these enemies that they're not going to negotiate or take this. I mean, is that completely loony? What do you think of something like that?
Well, Jonathan, if you're running for Prime Minister of Israel, you just earned my vote.
Yeah, something like, I don't know, very like, every day that they're not, we're going to, it's something that says we are going to fight for our people, stand up for our people, and that if you use force against Israel, you're a dead person.
I mean,
the opposite of the just war theory.
As Morgan and I were talking about on the Daily Objective, the enemy, the people of Israel have the resolve to win this war. And the enemy won't break that, but the Israeli leadership might, because you need a leadership that is ready and willing to do what needs to be done. Morgan.
I haven't read the Israeli edition of New Textbook of Americanism because I can't read Hebrew, but there you go. So there was a quote by, I want to say it was an Israeli general, I think from a few days ago, that anyone who engaged on October 7th have signed their own death warrant. That, that's good stuff. And there needs to be a bit more of that. And Netanyahu does kind of do that. I guess that goes to Yaron's point about him giving a good speech in English or whatever. It's an interesting question. Why does Netanyahu kind of say the right things and then not do them? And and on the one hand, I want to be sympathetic and kind of say, perhaps when you step into that role, there's such immense pressure from the US that it's quite difficult. But then at the same time, I think that you must still be able to push through and do these things. So I don't know. I suspect if you asked him, you'd get that kind of answer from him that, look, I have to balance all these kind of forces and it's really quite tough. But I think probably that just isn't good enough when it comes to the threat that Israel's facing.
Bonnie asks, hasn't anyone called Netanyahu on the fact that he does the opposite of his published works? I mean, Bonnie, you're a regular viewer of this channel. I'm sure you've heard me. I've probably said this more than once, that there should be a class action lawsuit by people who bought the book just to get a refund, because clearly he doesn't believe what he wrote in his own book. Yeah, I want my $20 back. And Frank, thank you for the super chat, even though I saw that question in the regular chat and was going to ask it, but I appreciate it even more as a super chat. He asks, do you believe any news reported by Al Jazeera? So we, Morgan and I talked about the West Bank on the Daily Objective, and in preparation, I thought, you know what, I know enough about the West Bank, but why don't I just search West Bank on YouTube and see what comes up? And of course, it's been in the news somewhat because Israel is operating there a little bit. And the first stories are from Al Jazeera, and I'm like, I'll just click it, see what they say. So first of all, the reporter, they go to the reporter and they say, we're joined by whatever her name is in occupied East Jerusalem. And she refers to the IDF as the Israeli Occupation Forces, which is something anti-Semites do. Instead of IDF, they write IOF on Twitter. I see it a lot. So do I believe anything? No, this is a propaganda network of an Islamic totalitarian regime. It's one of our friends, supposedly, in the Middle East as Westerners. They have, what I heard was a great airline, but yeah, we should look into who our friends are and reconsider. Maybe it's a good New Year's resolution. Reconsider, should we be friends with people who fund terrorists and propagandize on their behalf? Thank you, Yair, for the super chat. Jonathan.
Well, I'll just say, I mean, Israel, I always grew up with the stories of like how they hunted down methodically everyone who was involved with Munich. They hunted down all those Nazis, years and years after the fact. And I always thought there was something very impressive and moral and just about that, that Israel didn't turn the other cheek and, all right, well, that was years ago. And, they went and they delivered justice. And I guess, again, it's so easy and it's almost sounds ridiculous to be any type of a backseat driver when you're here in the States and you're safe and you're not in the middle of this. But like my hope for Israel would be that no one in the Middle East would want to be associated with Islamic terrorism. Exactly. I mean, and look at the history in Japan. Obviously, I mean, the bombs were terrible, the war was terrible, but Japan has become such a tremendous power to their credit because they found a better philosophy. So I don't know if it's going to take a nuclear bomb in the Middle East, but I do think there can be a change of philosophy. Whereas no one would want to be caught dead, literally having anything to do with these Islamic totalitarian ideas.
When you
Jonathan,
look
I
at
actually want
Germany,
yeah.
yeah, I
Kirk,
was
you
going to say,
wanna-
look at Germany. Sorry, look at Germany post World War II. It seems like a country that's like deathly afraid of sliding back into some flavor of authoritarianism, like Nazism or even communism, ever since the fall or since the end of the Cold War.
Can I just say on Al Jazeera? Sorry, I think you mentioned this, Razi, but Al Jazeera is the Qatari state broadcaster. And I can't remember, was the question, do we read Al Jazeera? As part of this job, I do go and look at Al Jazeera fairly regularly. And the thing about Al Jazeera is it often isn't even, when it comes to their news articles, it isn't necessarily the facts that they report per se or anything like that. It's just the whole way they frame things is from such a different angle that they're truly, really awful. And and then on top of that, what I find really bad is the way that people in the West treat Al Jazeera like it's a credible source. So there's a British former politician who I really have quite liked for quite a long time called Roy Stewart. He wrote a book recently, and I heard him say something on a podcast that he does that that he thinks that if people want to be informed about the conflict, they should go read Al Jazeera because they do really good stuff. And I instantly lost a huge amount of respect for him, because if you can go read Al Jazeera and think, wow, this is really quality journalism, it's really bizarre, and it immediately puts a huge rift between you and me. That was a bit of a shame, because I had a fair bit of respect for that guy, and almost met him on one occasion. Anyway, so yeah, Al Jazeera is terrible. But anyway.
Yeah, actually, we differ on that point of losing a lot of respect for Rory Stewart over that comment, because apparently you need to have some respect for somebody to lose it. And yeah, I think we disagree on Rory Stewart, or at least we disagreed until you heard him say that. I also yeah, had a point about the issue of framing. That's, we spoke about this when we talked about Palestinian propaganda a few days ago. There's what I call lying while telling the truth. I mean, you can say about something that happens, and you choose what it is that you say, which did actually happen, and you leave the context out of it. I said this in the context of the man who it took us 20 minutes to mention, Owen Jones, saying that the Israeli finance minister a month or so ago said there are 2 million Nazis in the West Bank, and Owen Jones reported that and said, look, this is added his commentary to it. What he didn't say was this was after that poll where 75% of the people in the West Bank said they support October 7th. Jonathan, I want to actually ask you about Al Jazeera. You are the television personality on this channel and on other channels as well. You get a call now from some prince in the thingy, and he says, we will pay you 20 barrels of oil a day for to be a regular commentator on Al Jazeera.
I wouldn't go on Al Jazeera, and I wouldn't have gone on RT. You remember that one, from years ago? Absolutely not. And I want to thank Yair Roth for his contribution, and Douglas, who became a member, online. And to me, I just quickly tally back to what we started with, this idea of Israel lost the war, because frankly, Razi, I don't watch Al Jazeera. It's not something that's on my media landscape. But his Israel lost the war, kind of got me thinking. You've still got, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of Israelis who are, and the receiving end of rockets. Rockets are being fired at Israel, let alone being held hostage. It makes me go back to what Ms. Rand talked about, of actually the role of government. I mean, government has a monopoly in the use of force, because they're supposed to use it to protect you. That's their job, to protect you. And I mean, I think in a weird way, it's like if Israelis are not being protected against force, then government is not doing its job. That's exactly what the role of government is, to protect you. And as long as they're under assault, as long as their family members and friends are being held captive, they're not doing their job.
Yeah. Now it's I go back to Morgan and I talking about the West Bank, but there are still rockets being fired from Gaza. It is 3 months since October 7th. And of course, soldiers are dying. And yeah, so the way Israel is executing this war, again, I've seen worse on Israel's part. I like how the north of Gaza looks. I think that's a good look for the whole of Gaza. But something is there's a serious insufficiency there in the overall operation, Kirk.
Yeah, I just want to add more on the whole Al Jazeera topic. I think we need to start referring to them as the Qatar public relations firm, formerly known as Al Jazeera. I remember Faisal Saeed Al Mutar talked about this. One of the things that's underappreciated about Al Jazeera is, I guess, their Arabic faction is a lot more. It's a lot worse than they are in English. I remember he's said before that Al Jazeera in English, they'll talk about the importance of like gay rights and LGBT and all that stuff, but in Al Jazeera Arabic, they're a lot more homophobic. And just a quick Google search, I'm pretty sure I remember like hearing about how Al Jazeera Arabic is a lot more explicitly anti-Semitic. And I think a few years ago, even The Guardian was reporting about how Al Jazeera had to suspend some journalists for Holocaust denial. And yeah, unfortunately with Al Jazeera, whenever you like do a quick Google search on what's going on with Israel and Palestine, they're usually one of the first sources to come up. And I think I think a lot of people just don't know better or don't really care to know better.
There's something to be said about about Al Jazeera in the context of our topic today itself is Israel losing the war, because my excellent tweet, if I may say so myself, from October 8th was pointing to something that is a real concern. Now, I don't think it should be as big a concern as it is for Israel, and I think Israel should be able to say to its friends and allies in the US, look, we disagree, and this is our thing. So let's agree to disagree if we must. But yeah, in terms of the PR aspect of this war, the Palestinians, they always do a fantastic job in again, quotation marks, but in large part because of their allies in Western media. But the fact that Al Jazeera has managed to pull one over on us to this extent, that their English content, I don't speak Arabic, so I can assume their Arabic content is worse, but their English content is so bad, and yet this is considered a mainstream media source in Western countries, which should be shocking, and the fact that it isn't is terrifying in and of itself. Morgan.
And there's a lot of cognitive dissonance. I noticed someone mentioned that Tom Hartman was on Russia Today, and I remember like as soon as the whole Russia-Ukraine conflict blew up back in February of 2022, a lot of people recognized rightfully that Russia Today cannot be trusted. Clearly, they're gonna have a bias on this whole conflict with Ukraine. But I notice a lot of commentators out there, they don't really apply this same level of scrutiny, this same standard when it comes to Al Jazeera covering the war in Israel.
Yeah, I guess the whole thing with Al Jazeera, the fact that people view it as a respectable mainstream source, goes to the point of, I guess, one, that people don't have a huge amount of knowledge about the conflict going on. So when they read some of these articles, they maybe don't pick up on the way in which Al Jazeera is framing it, and that that Al Jazeera is framing it in a way that's so immoral and disgusting, and so therefore they kind of pick it up. But then it goes again to the way in which people, I don't know, it almost goes to the way in which I think people don't pass moral judgment. They're kind of reluctant to judge sources like Al Jazeera as basically disgusting, because other people say that it's a mainstream and respectable source, therefore it must be. And the same thing with Russia Today. The fact that there were British politicians who would take jobs working for Russia Today and so on and so forth, it's just repulsive. I'm glad Russia Today, I think, has basically gone away now. I think did it get kicked out of British broadcasting, but Al Jazeera is still here for the time being, at least.
Yeah, which is also a weird situation. We see many on the left trying to somehow combine support for Ukraine and support for the Palestinians, which of course makes no sense, because the Palestinians are not just allies of Russia, but they are fighting for not exactly the same form of totalitarianism, but both are fighting against for totalitarianism and against freedom. But yeah, the left, fortunately, many on the right let themselves get away with things. Jonathan.
Well, I mean, the media to me is of less interest than what's happening on the ground. I mean, in the military leaders, and hopefully ending this war. And I mean, is what needs to happen ultimately that the public, I mean, the people who keep Hamas in power, the people who shelter them, the people who give them financial aid, I mean, that all has to be destroyed. Their will and their interest in supporting this, right? I mean, so this, to some extent, I saw some interviews with some Palestinians who they said, Israel dropped these flyers. They told us to move here, but they didn't give us, and it's like Israel sets itself up as we're really sorry, we have to inconvenience you. But I mean, isn't part of winning the war breaking the spirit of people to support or be associated with this philosophy at all?
I mean, Israel is spending so much of its time apologizing for things. This was actually an operation in the West Bank where soldiers went into a mosque and used the mosque speaker system that the whole village can hear, and said,
Said the Shema.
Yeah, said some prayer, but also said, this whole issue, this is, times are changing, something to that effect. We're no longer going to put up with terrorism. They got in trouble. People graffitiing things in Gaza, even waving the Israeli flag in Gaza is somehow something that soldiers get in trouble for. I think this is a necessary thing to do, and it goes back to showing that Israel, at the leadership level, hasn't realized what the problem is, and that actual military victory is the solution to it.
I mean, I'll just say quickly, here in the States, it was big reported when they showed, Palestinian men lined up in their boxer shorts or whatever with their hands up, and isn't this terrible? This is so inhumane. I mean, that's that's how it's presented. Israel. So, and it's even presented as Israel's war on the Palestinians, completely out of context and BS.
It should be Israel's war on the Palestinians. That's the problem here. Israel should recognize that the Palestinian people are the enemy. But yeah, that's when terrorists are captured while fighting. They are made to strip because they often wear bombs. It's not to humiliate them, but it would be a good thing if that was the reason. So on all fronts and in every aspect, unfortunately, Israel doesn't understand what needs to be done. Yeah, Douglas, you're mentioning George Galloway. Luckily, I was away for a few weeks when the George Galloway episode was done, but we have an episode about George Galloway's anti-Semitism from a few weeks ago. You can look that up on the channel. Kirk.
I have nothing to add at the moment.
Morgan, you were on the George Galloway episode, right?
Yeah, I was.
Do you you can talk about something else if you want.
No, I can talk. What was Douglas saying about George Galloway?
I mean, I just saw the name George Galloway and it kept scrolling. So,
Okay, George Galloway is someone who, unfortunately, I share a country with, and he's Scottish. He was a politician in the UK for a long time. I don't think he's no longer in the House of Commons, but he was a member of Parliament for a long time. He's on the hard left of British politics and has a number of reprehensible opinions about the Middle East and in particular Israel. I think there's very good case for making out that he's a complete anti-Semite, although he would deny that. The Israeli spokesperson who you may have seen speak on behalf of Israel in this conflict, Eylon Levy, when he was a student at Oxford University about, I want to say it was 6 or 7 years ago, invited George Galloway to debate with him on a stage. And when mid-debate, George Galloway found out he was Israeli, he left the stage and left the room because he, on principle, wouldn't speak to someone who was Israeli. What is it? I mean, there's a litany of things which George Galloway has done. He took a job with Russia Today, for example. He didn't think that was beneath him. So George Galloway is awful. And to be honest, his opinions about Israel are just the tip of the iceberg. And this goes on and on and on. He's basically a communist. So he's reprehensible. You'll see him go around wearing the kind of Chairman Mao outfits. He's an utterly bizarre figure. He also humiliated himself by going on Celebrity Big Brother once.
That was what I was going to bring up. I was going to bring up the one good thing about George Galloway. Look him up on Celebrity Big Brother.
He wore a cat suit and got on all fours and drank milk out of a bowl. This is the serious and impressive individual that you're dealing with. So no, George Galloway's completely rotten. And I was going to say something else, but I've lost my train of thought now, and we're talking about George Galloway. But there you go.
Yeah, sorry if I had nothing to say about George Galloway, but I've never heard of the guy before, and I think I might have missed the episode where we talked about him. But yeah, it sounds like a real character.
It's a state of blissful ignorance to not know who he is, Kirk. So try and stay in it.
Yeah, you're not in tune enough with British politics of 15, 20 years ago when he was around. Yeah.
Can I quick to throw something out? I'm still trying to, I don't know George Galloway, but I'm still thinking about this idea. I think it could be a good one of, Israel winning the war. What does that look like? Well, it seems to me to begin with, it's getting the hostages back, right? I mean, this is like the bare minimum. And what about, I'm just going to throw this out there. What about saying something like, there's 100 hostages. Do we know how many hostages? How many are still at least 100?
134.
134. So you say something like, every day they're not returned, we're going to kill 1,300 Palestinians. We're going to bomb them indiscriminately. And we want these hostages home now. And we are serious about it. That is the role of government. And every day that goes by, we're going to kill another 1,300. And, make the Palestinian people say, get them out of here. Make them afraid of being associated with this ideology. Is that crazy?
So Willful Thinker says the last count is 129. Yeah, Jonathan, I'm actually going to disagree with you on that. So first of all, it comes the Israel's even the mistakes Israel makes when it comes to the hostages, like temporary ceasefires, releasing terrorists, and so on, comes from a good place of actually valuing human life. And the reason the Palestinians don't have that, and the reason, which is also the reason the Palestinians hide behind women and children, send a woman in a wheelchair to the soldiers to lure them in, is because they don't value human life. So first of all, I think they would love it if you killed 1,300 every day. It would be great for PR. Owen Jones would be, live streaming 24/7. And yeah, this would not make a difference. So that's the one thing. The other thing is that I think it would be great if the hostages could be freed. But I think the victory of the goal, victory in this war is the defeat of the Palestinian people. So there's no more Hamas, there's no more Palestinian Islamic Jihad, there's no more PLO, there's no more Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. The organizations are gone, the will to fight is gone. The society that brought these people up is no longer a thing. And if hostages could be saved as part of that's great. But what will definitely be saved is future hostages, which as of now are guaranteed by the fact that Israel always releases terrorists in exchange for hostages.
I guess the thing with the hostages is that, do we actually know that they're still living? I guess is the question. So whilst it's not, I guess that's not because you asked Jonathan, is that crazy? I guess that's not crazy. It might just be that actually that number isn't even 129. It may actually be far smaller, at least as far as I'm aware. Of course, there were these three hostages who had escaped and who got shot by the Israeli forces, of course. So to what extent, even the ones who are still living, do the Palestinian authorities actually still have control of the hostages? And you may, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I mean, there are a few questions in there. I would think generally they are kept alive because they are bargaining chips. So they're kept alive probably in horrible conditions, but they are kept alive.
I mean, war is horrible and it's terrible. There's no way to like put a nice spin on it. It's it's why you want it to end. Again, I'm kind of speaking out of my keister here, but it's why you want it to end as soon as possible. And 150% of the blame for all of this lies with Hamas. 100% of it, any of it. And that's what I would hope Israel keeps reminding people.
So Sharon has a comment in the chat that I wanted to address. So she says, or he, it could be a he or a she in Hebrew, Israel is always slow in revealing information, so people rush to conclusions. You need patience. Everything is being recorded and documented. Remember the Goldstone report. So when I read this, the first thing that comes to mind is the El Ali hospital bombing, so-called bombing, where as soon as it happened, it's reported that Israel bombed the hospital everywhere. It's reported that 500 people died within minutes of the bombing, which of course you cannot actually know such a number if that is the actual number. And it's reported as news immediately, and Israel doesn't say anything. They say we're looking into it. Now we're looking into it sounds whoever wants it to sound like they're guilty, it'll sound that way. And it takes a couple of hours, and Israel shows footage showing that it was actually Palestinian, or it was Palestinian rockets, probably from Palestinian Islamic Jihad, that rocket was misfired. But you go on some of these anti-Semites Twitter accounts like Jeremy Corbyn. I quote tweeted him a few days ago from his tweet from the 17th of October. This is when this happened. Still has that tweet up saying that Israel bombed a hospital and 500 people died. Two things that are not true about that. So yes, I mean, there's a thing there where if you have a thing that you want to put into people's minds rather than report the news, you will find whatever helps you get them there. And yeah, the pro-Palestinian side, their war is not just against Israel. It is a war on the truth, and they're fighting it. And again, unfortunately, in the PR sense, they are winning.
But can I just throw this out there? So is the idea that if Israel bombs a hospital, they're losing the PR? Like, is that it? I mean, wouldn't the idea be if Israel bombs a hospital, you'd think, oh boy, the Palestinians better lay down their arms right away because Israel's serious about this. I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's like there's no way to make war pretty. There's no way to make it all nice and neat where, isn't it about scaring and destroying the will of your enemies to fight?
Yeah, and that's another thing. We've spoken several times. We did 3 episodes about UNRWA in the past week and a half or so. And, these hospitals, first of all, there's a really disproportionate number of hospitals in Gaza. The hospitals, the schools, because of the way this plays out in Western media among the useful idiots of the Palestinians.
They've all got weapons stored there. They're all bases, right? They're all right.
This is where Hamas is. So if Israel was to fight this war properly, it would involve bombing hospitals. Now, when the Al Shifa hospital, which everybody has known for decades, is the base of Hamas, the headquarters was under Al Shifa hospital. Israel did a press conference saying, look at all this proof. Now, who is gonna buy that proof? The people who are anti-Israel propagandists? No, they're gonna say Israel manufactured it. And in any case, if you have that proof and you're at war, why are you not then acting on it rather than having a press conference? So yeah, This is why we're saying something that we don't want to be true, but that Israel very much seems to be losing. Kirk.
Yeah, and to add to what John's been saying all episode about the fact that war is not pretty, and I think you, Razi, mentioned earlier about how there are a lot of people who try to align the cause for Ukraine with the cause of Palestinians, and I'm wondering if um, the mentality behind that is what Elon Journal called in its book, What Justice Demands, the underdog principle. People tend to sympathize more with Palestinians because they're the underdog in this conflict. And I wonder, like, that's what drove people to support Ukraine, where you see a lot of this rightful condemnation of Putin and Russia. They invaded Ukraine. They're killing civilians. They're blowing up hospitals and apartment buildings and this and that. But Putin and Russia are clearly the aggressor there. But now when it comes to Israel and Palestine, and Israel has to go into Gaza, they are not the aggressors. They are fighting. They're retaliating against aggression. But because their response is disproportionate, because they might accidentally blow up some civilian centers, sometimes out of necessity, because Hamas might be secretly operating out of there or hiding other weapons or whatever in there, then a lot of the people who were supporting Ukraine, now we can maybe say in some cases for the wrong reasons, are now looking at Israel. Maybe they don't really support Hamas or whatever, but they are very critical and scrutinizing of Israel because of their disproportionate response and the consequences of their retaliation.
I want to address, so Stephanie says in the chat, I'm really tired of being afraid of what idiots in the UN might say. Yeah, first of all, the Ayn Rand Center UK, I mentioned we had 3 episodes on UNRWA. We're not done with the UN. We are going to keep coming after them until there is nothing left to come after. But I think what Israel might have a valid fear of is less the idiots on the East River and more some of the idiots in Pennsylvania Avenue. I think that is a more legitimate fear. Morgan.
I'm going to disagree with you about the press conference kind of stuff, and I think there is a value in doing that. I think it's unfortunate that Israel's held to such a high standard for explaining itself, and I think that goes to a lot of the bias against Israel in the Western world in general. But although I completely agree that, for example, someone like the dreaded Owen Jones, we mentioned him again, or people of his ilk, are not going to be persuaded by that. I think there's a lot of people who are, in a sense, kind of floating voters who are kind of confused, who don't really know, and so on, who I think that evidence is actually fairly good at helping to persuade them, and for good reasons and for bad reasons. And I think part of the bad reasons that it helps persuade them is that people are much more perceptual than they used to be. And so I did an episode with James, it must have been a month or 2 ago now, about Leonard Peikoff's talk, "A Picture is Not an Argument." And so in a sense, you know, when people see things in the increasingly picture-dominated news media, in October 7th, they see some of the pictures coming out or so on and so forth, then they think, oh my God, we must support Israel because this is perceptually horrible. And then as the war goes on and they see dead Palestinian children, they think, oh my God, this is just hot. Or they don't even really think, they perceive this is horrible, this is not very nice. Therefore, they turn against Israel. So I think Israel showing the pictures and doing this stuff I think will be useful in persuading some people. But also we need to get away from the increasing dominance in the media just of pictures. Pictures aren't irrelevant, of course, but people need to be more conceptual about this than they are just see someone throwing up a horrible picture of a child who was caught in a bombing and thinking that's enough to make your mind up on these things.
By the way, Stephanie also says that the donors who pulled funding from Harvard can send it to Israel. They can also send it to ARCUK. We are actually $1 billion is our target budget for this year. So yeah, if anybody wants to send, we could do some great stuff with that money. And I think ARCUK with $1 billion, you know, the UN might actually be a thing of the past if we had that kind of funding. Jonathan.
I'll just say, I mean, you know, we've given you, our audience, a bunch of great resources to learn and read at least more about Ayn Rand's perspective on this. Probably the first being the UN. Go over to the Ayn Rand lexicon, read what Ayn Rand had to say about the UN. You'll probably be inspired and, you know, hear more about what Razi has to say. But Kirk mentioned Alain Journo's book, Winning the Unwinnable War, which is brilliant. It's probably 10, 12 years ago now, but it's totally recommended. And the Morgan mentioned Dr. Peikoff's article about a picture is not an argument, which is also outstanding. So, use this as a springboard and avail yourself to these texts that I know we've learned from by eminent philosophers and eminent objectivists that'll make this whole picture a lot more clear.
Yeah. Wait, did you mention Ilan's book on Israel as well? Or because I was just thinking I probably have it somewhere here and I can wave it. But yeah, What Justice Demands by Ayn Rand is the best book I've read on the Arab-Israeli conflict. So I would definitely recommend that one as well. And yeah, we have some other recommendations. I will quickly just say that when this show is over in about 13 minutes, go to our sister channel, The Briefly Objective. There is a video by James Valiant titled "The United Nations Supports Terrorism." Yeah, we don't mince words. I mean, sometimes I think a few days ago we had an episode titled what was it? Is plagiarism a Zionist conspiracy? Sometimes we have question marks in the title, and I think the answer to that was kind of implied. But yeah, we those clips are short, they're shareable. Anybody who, of course, you should share these shows, but some people are easier to convince to watch a 3-minute clip and a 1-hour clip, and then maybe they will also join us on this show, and of course argue with us if they disagree. Ideally in a super chat, that does help us get to our $1 billion goal. Yeah, let's go around. I will have something else to promote at the end, but Jonathan, any final thoughts on today's topic?
Well, I'll just say, Razi, every day you start these programs, and we want to thank, I know we're getting lots of new subscribers and interest. So thank you for, being part of what we're doing with the Ayn Rand Center UK. But, you start the show, it's day 70 of the war, 80 of the war. And, it's to live your life in a state of war is so terrible. To have to be one of the Israeli soldiers inconvenienced, to put in harm's way, to have to be the family of these people. It's such a terrible state to be in. So, my mind and my heart and my best wishes are with the IDF to bring this war to a close by doing whatever it takes, in my opinion, to make this threat non-threatening. So thinking of them every day, and appreciative to all of our super chatters who are part of what we do.
Yeah, and I did mention earlier this week, this episode is coming. I don't know exactly when, but I will have an Israeli on to talk about. Look, everywhere in the media, you hear about the suffering of the Palestinians during this war. You don't hear about the fact that this war was imposed on Israel and how Israelis are doing, because Israelis don't do this PR thing of whining to the world. But yeah, it is not an easy time in Israel, and we will have that episode here. Kirk.
I would like to finish today's show by saying that all I want is peace and prosperity in the Middle East, and I don't think that's going to happen until Islamic totalitarians that rule various regions in the Middle East are crushed.
I just saw a message about the person who just joined. Why the headline? Scroll back to the start, and we have spent 50 minutes explaining it, so it is worth your time. I also see somebody asking us to read a question. I don't actually read all the chat, so I don't know where that question is. I can look it up, but generally speaking, yes, we do prioritize super chats. Morgan.
I guess for a fair bit of the show, what we were talking about was Netanyahu and his inability to see things through. Anyone who's ever gone and spoken with a therapist will talk to them about, you need to be assertive about what your needs are and about making sure other people respect them. And I think we should probably send Netanyahu to see a therapist so that he can be more assertive about asserting what he and his country need. Maybe that would do him some good. And there's also, just a further Kirk's point, I guess, there was a saying in ancient Rome that if you wish for peace, prepare for war. And that is what will be required, I think, for Israel to see through and secure its national interests.
Yeah, the question was something about Israel. Wouldn't it make Israel a terrorist organization if it killed Palestinian civilians? It was for Jonathan. I can just answer no. Jonathan, if you want to take that on.
It's completely retaliatory, in my opinion. And no, this wouldn't make Israel a terrorist organization at all. Israel didn't start this. They're doing everything they can to finish it and to end it. And I'm on their side.
Yeah, and they should do so with as few losses on their side. The fact that the Palestinians decided that they want Israelis to die is not a reason for Israelis to die. Israel should end this war with as few losses on its side and as much devastation on the Palestinian side, so that they never think of doing this again, and anybody else who is thinking about it would also lose the will to do so. Jonathan, you look like you have something else to add.
No, just thanks to you and to our viewers and listeners all over the world.
Yeah, thanks guys. Thanks everybody for watching. We are back with the Daily Objective. It is a truly daily show, so it is at 5:30 p.m. tomorrow. We'll be here on Sunday as well, and on Monday. Monday we are back with the reality show. Monday, the reality show. I'm sure we'll talk about Israel, but that episode is the ARCUK Republican debate. We are going to be none of the Republican candidates are actually going to be a part of that debate, but we have somebody who is reluctantly voting for Vivek, somebody who is not voting but would reluctantly vote for Nikki Haley, and we'll see if we can get somebody who might reluctantly vote for DeSantis. The Trump chair, as in the actual debates, will be left empty. So yeah, stay tuned for that. That will be the 1 hour, 1 hour only, when the Ayn Rand Center UK becomes a sort of democracy, and we will actually have voting on a bunch of things like who is your candidate, who is the best on this or that issue, and who won the debate. So make sure you tune in for that. Before that, there are 3 daily objectives between now and then, and a reminder that the Briefly Objective premieres in 5 minutes. The title of that is The United Nations Supports Terrorism. If you agree, click the link in the chat, like it, share it so that people know that the United Nations supports terrorism. Thank you guys for joining me on the panel. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you back here tomorrow.